Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson. I'd like to welcome you to our Civil Human Bible study. We're continuing in the book of Matthew. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And as a result of that, that means that the first thing I want to do is to approach these scriptures today as a human being. And so I'm trying to look at these to pull out the things that I believe are applicable to all humans across the board. And the second is I want to be civil. And what that means is that I want to respect those basic shared human needs that we all have. The things like being able to decide for ourselves what we want to believe about the big unanswered questions, to be independent from control of others and intimidation, to vote for those who are going to have control over us, to intimately love whoever we want to, and last, to live the life that we want to. So those are the rules that I'm applying this Bible study with. And I'm so grateful for you joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and read the passage starting in Matthew chapter 12, and we're at verse 1 just right now. So let's go ahead and read that passage. At that time, Jesus went through the grass fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Then he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not condemn the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." This passage is a really interesting one to me because it really cuts to the heart of what Jesus's principles are. And I want to jump into the verses themselves and look at some of the Greek words and see how their translations might help color how we look at this passage. And then also talk about some cultural things that really do change the way we view and understand this passage. So the first thing that we hear is that these disciples are walking through a grain field, like a wheat field probably, and they're on their way somewhere. And the disciples are hungry, and so as they're walking through the field, they pluck off the heads of a piece of grain, and then they chew on the grains that are in the head. And so the Pharisees, who are the teachers of the law, these are the religious leaders of the day who are really at odds with Jesus and are really trying to discredit him and destroy his work and his ministry. They said to them, "It is not lawful for your disciples, your students, to eat and to essentially harvest wheat on the Sabbath." First, I want to talk a little bit about what Sabbath is. Culturally, especially in America, maybe like 50 years ago, Sunday was sort of the day that nobody worked, nothing was open. It was for many places, not all places, but for many places that was the Sabbath day. And so the concept of Sabbath is one of the first 10 commandments that are given to humans from God. You may have the 10 commandments, you may have heard of them. One of them says that we should remember to set apart one day of the week to rest and to keep it holy. And this word holy in the Hebrew is kadesh, which means to set it apart as something that is special and unique. So in this culture, that became a significant set of laws. You could not do any work. You couldn't bake any food. You couldn't hunt. You couldn't farm. There was nothing you could do. And there were several rules that were written out in their culture that delineated what you could and couldn't do. Because a farmer couldn't harvest on the Sabbath, it was then the Pharisees pointing out, well, look, your disciples are breaking off the grains and consuming them. That's kind of harvesting. So why not point out the fact that they're doing this on the Sabbath when they're not supposed to? This whole Sabbath context and idea is built upon the original Genesis story. So the very beginning, the very first story that we get in this Bible is about Adam and Eve, you may have heard of, and that God creates the earth in 7 stages. We often translate that day, but really the word simply means ages or sections of times. So in 6 days, he does all of these different stages of development of the earth. And then on the 7th day, it says that he rested. And so that has always been in the Jewish culture a significant portion of their culture, because everybody had to rest. And something that, frankly, these days I really wish that we would grab onto again. We need some rest days. And this is a little bit of a red herring, I realize, but I did just want to touch on that. So why were the Pharisees even bringing this up? What was their point? Why even bother with this? So the Pharisees, who are the religious leaders of the day, they are trying to discredit Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is pointing out to people around them, pointing out to the Jewish culture, that these religious leaders, the Pharisees and also Sadducees and others, that they are all there for show, that they are there to wear these amazing outfits and costumes. They're there to stand on the stage and pray loudly so that everybody can see them. They're there to enforce the rules on civilization, but they have yet to lift a finger to help those who are suffering. I can't help but see a lot of similarities today in our religious leaders, unfortunately, who are very good at presenting themselves on stage and in production and on TV, and yet their ministries, regrettably, their churches, do not even help the homeless or provide any medical care or any of the core services that Jesus really points out. So what does Jesus do? He basically provides a defense and says, look, you remember back in this Old Testament, which is this beginning part of the Bible before Jesus' time, that David, who's this king, went through the temple and ate some bread that was there because he was hungry. And this bread was only supposed to be eaten by the priest because it was special. You may have heard of communion bread. Those of us who come from a Christian background or a Christian Catholic background, there's this consecrated bread that becomes the body of Jesus and that we partake every week on and to remember his death. So essentially, this is that kind of consecrated bread. And so Jesus is pointing out the fact that, look, you don't seem to have a problem with King David, who's the greatest significant figure in the history of our Jewish culture. You don't have a problem with him eating the priest bread, and yet you have a problem with, my disciples, my students, just breaking off a piece of wheat. Come on. And then he goes a step further, and he uses this analogy of saying, what about the priests? The priests themselves work on the Sabbath day. So aren't they, breaking the rules by working on a day that they're supposed to be resting? And of course he says, no, that's not the case. That obviously, Sunday is a part of ritual and is a part of learning about God in their synagogues, etc., that this is the Sabbath. And as a result of this, Jesus is saying, look, we provide conditions within the rules to fit the circumstances that are around them. This is really where I want to go on this particular passage. I think the most important part is this coming up right now, and that is we're going to talk about something really important to Jesus and really foundational to all of his message and to everything that he does from here on out. He turns to these religious leaders and says, if you had understood this phrase, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. I've mentioned before that as a young man, reading the scriptures, I was a fairly devout individual. I was attempting to try to be the best Christian that I could. And I went on to become a minister in a fairly conservative denomination of Christianity. This particular verse, the statement of Jesus, was a real problem for me. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because in our culture, in that very conservative culture, it was really all about following these rigorous rules, praying for hours, going to church every day. I don't even joke about that. Going to service on Sunday 3 times, praying for an hour at a time, fasting, all of these things that you could do to make yourself better. And this is where Jesus breaks with the religious leaders of his day. And this is where Jesus' message, which I truly wish the church would get back on board with, is that it's not about these sacrifices that we make. It's not about the rituals. It's not about church. It's not about praying the amount of hours you pray. All those things do have some benefits. But when it comes down to it, when it's all said and done, what matters is that we are being merciful to people. What matters is just this action of our heart. It's not a matter of me not eating food to show that I can fast and suffer for God. It's a matter of me setting all that stuff aside and looking around me to see those who are suffering right here, right now, that I can touch, that I can change. And so Jesus points out to these religious leaders, why are you concerned about this minuscule law that they're kind of breaking, with regard to the Sabbath day's rest? Why aren't you more concerned with all of these people who are gathered around, who are sick, who are ailing, who are suffering? This is what God desires, is this heart of mercy. I'm going to go ahead and read my translation for you. This is my take on the passage to kind of translate it into an application for all humans across the board as much as I can. And then I want to give you just a couple of my walkaways. Jesus and his students were walking through a wheat field on a Sunday afternoon. His students were hungry, so they plucked off a couple heads of the wheat stalk and munched on the grains. The Pharisees saw and yelled at Jesus, "Your students are not doing what's right on the Sabbath. Technically, they are harvesting grain, and so they're working, and no one is supposed to work on the Sabbath." Jesus replied, "You are experts in our historic books. Don't you remember reading that our great King David ate the holy bread that only the priests in the temple were supposed to eat?" And then he added, "You are experts in the laws. Haven't you read the law that states that the priests who work on the Sabbath aren't breaking the law even though they are not supposed to be working?" In closing, Jesus noted, there is something far more important than this temple, than this situation. Had you understood this, I desire mercy, not these sacrifices. You would not have condemned the innocent men. I myself, a mere human being, am ruler over the Sabbath. And I want to close on this remark that Jesus makes. It's a really kind of weird one. He says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. A lot of people, try to point to the fact that this is Jesus claiming that he's God or that he's the Messiah. And really the literal translation of this passage is that a basic human being is more important or a master of the rules of the Sabbath. In other words, these rules that we've created in our society, in our culture, they are there for a reason. They're there to help us get to a place of upholding these virtues. But sometimes these rules end up creating situations and contexts that end up hurting people and that end up actually detracting from these virtues. And this is the point of Jesus and much of his ministry, is that let's not worry about the rules. Let's worry about the virtues. Let's worry about what we as human beings need to look at as being good, as being better, as being happy and having a happy society. These are the virtues that we need to hold on to. A couple of points before we close today. I want to note that sometimes in doing the work of goodness and compassion, we will bring attention not only to those who are suffering, but also to those who are doing nothing and who are causing it. As we saw, the Pharisees are gunning it for Jesus. They're trying to destroy him. I know all that you and I have to do is open our news feed and see the exact same kinds of actions being done to those who are trying to stand up for justice, who are trying to stand up for those who are suffering. When we do these good works, it means that other people are going to end up looking bad. And that's just part of the equation. And I think something that we just need to hold on to. And they will look for any possible way to discredit us. But that doesn't matter. We should continue to just focus on helping those who are suffering around us. I hope you had a great 4th of July weekend, those of you in the U.S. and those outside. I hope you had a good weekend as well. I want to thank you for being a part of this Bible study. It really matters a lot to me to have your reflections, to have your thoughts and your comments. It's really helped me grow as an individual and just as a human being. I'm looking forward to meeting with you tomorrow live at noon on Facebook. And until then, I want to say to you, I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It is the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now, I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.